continuing with this series on historical Jesus and looking at this particular message in Matthew's Gospel. You also find it in Luke with a little bit of variation. It's called the Sermon on the Mount, teachings from Jesus. I'd like us to look at verse 5 today. So, you can use your Bibles to look at that and try to put it in context, where Jesus says as part of this message, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Now remember, instead of blessed, I suggested that based on some scholarship, looking at this word, it's better to think of this as Jesus essentially saying, how valuable or how honored in God's eyes are the meek. Or you could also say gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Now this is a problematic text, for me anyway, thinking about how can the meek or gentle inherit the earth. So I'd like to unpack it a little bit. And I think there's something here for you individually and for the church. There's something here for you individually in your relationships and for people who are in relationship. So hopefully this helps. I've mentioned some of this before. I've talked to some of you about it before, but I think it may still be helpful to go through it. Now, it can be a very ruthless world. We know that. And by ruthless, I don't mean that everybody named Ruth has gone away. I mean, we live in a world that is violent and cruel, or at least can be, and in many cases is. Some people never experience anything but hardship in this life for different reasons. Now, evolutionary studies, beginning with this concept of survival of the fittest, that talks about predation, in other words, animals eating other animals, the fear of being eaten by a predator. I would suggest that fear still is rooted in our brain stems. Adrenaline is a good feature for self-preservation, but overstress and worry is killing us as never before. In fact, we sometimes are still reacting to situations as if a saber-toothed tiger was still after us. Okay? Now, that's coming from our reptilian brain or brain stem. It's a good thing that helped us survive, right? But if you're facing life and every situation in life is doing that to you, you're overstressed. And that type of stress is also injuring our immune system, making us more vulnerable to all sorts of things, including cancer. Something else that I would like us to consider, according to experts, is that our relationships often begin with powerful attractions in the reptilian brain. So strong, romantic, sexual feelings that our culture often calls love, they tend to come and go. They're not necessarily bad, but that's why people feel attracted to each other. Something in the brainstem. And that's why every expert says we need to go beyond this initial powerful attraction to work on what's called a conscious relationship. If we don't switch to the conscious relationship and we just focus on that powerful romantic attraction, relationships will have problems. Because, again, the feelings come and go. So to move beyond the inner reptilian brain to the outer, more cognitive parts is essential. Again, romantic feelings come and go, like hunger. Our crocodile brain can feel attraction to many people. Just like our croc brain can have a variety of likes for different types of foods. But relationships shouldn't be like smorgasbords. Our culture treats relationships that way. So every time somebody feels attracted to somebody, you know, they go for it. It's okay to feel attracted to a lot of people. But does that mean you should pursue those relationships? Now, let me point out, again, we live in a very stressed out world. Anything can set us off. And by the way, I would suggest that it's okay to be irritated when driving, or it's okay to be stressed because of jobs, but we got to learn how to deal with this stress. And so the initial response, it comes from a reaction in what's again called our brainstem or reptilian brain. Anger. You know, we get scared when something happens to us on the freeway. I can't imagine what Richard has to put up with as a professional driver in a big rig. I don't know how you handle that with the way people drive. But all of this can set us off, the initial reactions. Now, but where do you go from here? From that moment of feeling somebody did something stupid while driving, should the next response be to ram them with our cars? Well, you know, if some people would like to do that, but again, we have to immediately start what? Calming down, okay? Immediately, the outer, you know, brain starts to take over and say, well, I'd like to get back with that person, but, you know, there's laws, there's consequences, and, you know, we have to talk ourselves down. So we're constantly talking down, getting the reptilian brain under control, the croc brain under control. And many things. It has to be controlled or we're out of control. Now, that's right, yeah. There's Mike. Okay. So we know some of these things.
Yes.
And we know these by now. It stresses the immune system. All sorts of health problems come from the stress, the tension, the anger, the fear. Notice some of the things that are up there, including cancer, we're told. So it's helpful to get things under control. That, by the way, I would suggest when we're meditating here and praying at the beginning, that's a good exercise to get things under control. Sooner or later, you got to back down, right? It's okay to be angry. What did Paul say? Be angry, but don't sin. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. Get the reptilian, in modern language, they get the reptilian brain under control. Because sooner or later, we got to back away. If you do something out of anger or out of resentment, you hurt somebody, you say something, then you got to go back and fix it. The sooner we get it under control, the better. The less damage we do to somebody else or to ourselves. But by the way, this is all in biblical wisdom, without the science. I'm just kind of connecting it, linking it with the science now. Help us understand a little bit more. Yeah, the triune brain. That's not the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, by the way. Okay? That's the brain has three parts to it. We're talking about that red part, where powerful emotions come from. Or some call it the reptilian brain. So survival, aggression, basic desires. It's just part of it. It's part of being human. It's not bad, but we have to recognize this is kind of who we are. This is who we are as human beings. But we're called to be something higher than just our reptilian brain. Yeah, time to switch to a conscious marriage. What relationship has problems like that one? Every relationship, right? There's somebody here in a relationship that doesn't. You know? Yeah, so, you know, all these issues. Now there's a little bit, I'll come back to that. So let me just say, so what does any of this have to do with Jesus and his teaching. How honored are the meek in God's eyes, for they shall inherit the earth. Curious Satan. Now, whether it's fear, stress, strong desires, anger, craving for power, or control over somebody else. We love to control people. The basic human response, again, is coming from the reptilian brain. It seeks to use any means to satisfy itself, to take care of our feelings of fear or aggression. And it causes a lot of stress and anger and hurt in our lives and in the world. So this basic human response, again, is coming from a part of our brain that we need to be under control. And if we don't get it under control, it usually results in using coercion or force of some kind in a relationship. Strong, threatening words, physical intimidation, or using one's status or position to control or manipulate others. Such is the world we live in. It is not the Jesus way. The poor Jewish peasants that Jesus was speaking to that day that he gave this sermon, they were experiencing oppressive power from Rome and its agents, like Herod. Rome was out to take the earth by force, openly. Didn't hide that. It claimed that it had a divine right to do that. And if you resisted, they said, you beat people up with a sword. That's Rome. It's typical of the world at that time and other times. If you resisted or challenged Rome's claim to take the world, you would die if you got in its way. What's what happened to Jesus, by the way? So I have to ask, how could Jesus claim that the meek or gentle would inherit the world or inherit the earth in the shadow of Roman domination? So there's a couple ways of looking at this verse. I think what Jesus is trying to say. And by the way, I think it applies to our world again today. First, you could say, this is one thing that he was talking about. The meek shall inherit the earth. Well, one way of looking at this would be in the second coming, Jesus turns over the earth to his followers after a bloody battle of Armageddon, as you've heard about. And then he reigns with the elite for 1,000 years on earth. But to tell you the truth, this sounds more like the Roman way of doing things than the historical Jesus. And I reject that interpretation, as you know. Now, a second way of looking about this is the meek inheriting the earth would mean conceiving a world, the followers of Jesus, conceiving a world that did not function based upon primal instincts, the desire or craving for power and control. In other words, rejecting reptilian politics. And what do we have going on today? Reptilian politics. I don't care what side. Turning away from this world and the way it works, or turning the world on its head, was what Jesus meant to do. Never using fear or something to justify manipulating others through their position of power, but instead powering down humbly. Does anybody here know anybody who likes to manipulate others? Ceasing to use aggressive language, rhetorical threats, the end of violence as a way of satisfying human greed, the desire for power. All human relationships based upon mutual love and service is what Jesus said. This was his vision of the earth that God created. An earth that was quickly turned and lost. It devolved into, if you read Genesis, the earth quickly devolves into corruption and violence, according to Genesis 6. God mourns when he looks at his creation and says the earth is corrupt and filled with violence. God is grieving. And he sets out to fix that problem, and ultimately through Jesus. In fact, if you read that story again, the Creator in Genesis 3 is a meek character, is a gentle character who's victimized by the very humans he creates and wants to share a relationship with and a good earth with. If you're meek, you become vulnerable, but God is vulnerable in his relationship with us. Jesus became vulnerable all the way to the cross. Meek is weak, but God and Jesus taught that somehow through this approach, God can change the world. That we can get away from reptilian politics, reptilian relationships, and have a new way. Can this way of Jesus transform the world? Can meekness overtake juggernauts and power brokers? Can it turn the world upside down? Well, Paul believed it could. In fact, he said the very cross that Rome used to promulgate its power and intimidate people, the very cross that it used to crucify Jesus, Paul said it turned. God used that cross to turn the tides on the very mongers that crucified Jesus. He says, in fact, if they knew this, they wouldn't have crucified the Lord of glory. Does the church believe this? That through this way, the world can be transformed. It's not our power in meekness, but it's God's power that does this. So I would ask, what gospel are we going to believe? Huh? To me, this is all reptilian politics. Every one of them. It's all after power and control. Using any device they can. The rhetoric, the force, the intimidation. There's got to be a better way. And I believe the church and the gospel is the better way. I do believe that the meek will inherit the earth. But the church has got to believe that. You've got to believe that in your relationships. We've got to practice that. Because power is killing us.
Amen. Amen.